So the next topic comes from Fox Sports, which we will react to. So they did a list written by Henry McKenna where he ranked the NFL's best marriages between quarterbacks and their teams. Okay, now here is the overall list that I will do a countdown on. So I don't know if I want to do all of them now. Let's start at number 10. Jaden Daniels and the Commanders at number 10. By the way, revisiting our first topic of quarterback tiers heading into 2025, I wouldn't have hated if Chris Sims had put Jaden Daniels in the top 4, but because it was just a 1-year thing, I would like to see him do it for 2 years. But he is knocking on that door in that core 4, whereas Joe Burrow hasn't done things for a minute in terms of like getting his team to the playoffs. So if Jaden Daniels is able to go to the playoffs again and Joe Burrow doesn't, I feel like Jaden Daniels should leapfrog him. But they've got him at number 10, Josh Allen and the Bills at number 9 in terms of marriages, Joe Burrow and the Bengals, Bo Nix and the Broncos, 6, Jared Goff and the Lions, 5, Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, 4, Baker Mayfield and the Bucks. He certainly didn't do well with the Browns. Browns are rarely a good marriage partner. We'll just leave it at that. Number 3, Matthew Stafford and the Rams. Number 2, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. And then number 1, this is the second list that we're talking about in a row that has Lamar Jackson number 1 with the Ravens. Bobby, I don't hate the list, but I feel like the write-up by Henry McKenna misses the mark a little bit, okay, of why he thinks it's the number 1 marriage. Just misses it a little bit. Okay, so this is what he has to say. The Ravens and Jackson aren't your typical team player relationship, but that's what makes them so special. After all, Jackson went 32nd overall in the draft. He wasn't the prototypical passer teams are accustomed to building their offense around. It took a creative and confident coach like John Harbaugh who could bring in the right coordinators to create an offense for Jackson. And what an offense they've made together. Last season, Jackson threw for almost 4,200 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, while rushing for 915 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jackson and the Ravens really understand each other. Relationship goals. Before I give my reaction, your thoughts on number 1, Lamar and Ravens being at the top of this list in terms of QB team marriages, and then number 2, Henry's reasoning for putting him number 1.
Yeah, I think the list obviously speaks for itself that this is 7 years running now. It'll be year 8. So I guess if you technically want to call it like 7.5 years running or would it be 6.5 years running? Because I'm trying to take out the first part of his rookie year where Joe was under center. So I guess technically it'd be 6.5 years running going into, am I doing the math correctly on that? It's year 8. So I believe it'd be 6.5 years running. Whatever it is, it's coming up on year 8. And clearly they're knocking on the door within this label of Super Bowl or bust. And so I like where they sit. And I think they deserve to sit up there. Mahomes and Andy Reid, obviously a close second. I think a lot of people probably would view that as a peculiar back seat that they're taking to Lamar and the Ravens because of the lack of championships compared to that duo. But I think, again, they're speaking to marriages and the way that it works together more so than they're speaking to what they've accomplished thus far. So I get that difference. And plus Mahomes and Andy have been together, I think, for maybe one more year than Harbaugh and Lamar have. So anyway, that's that. And then the second piece of the puzzle of this write-up, I know where you're going on this one, in terms of you wanting it to be a little bit more balanced, right, for your liking, in terms of how it's almost like the write-up is giving the coaching staff all the credit, maybe making an assumption that if it weren't for the hierarchy and the organizational consistency and stability, that Lamar wouldn't have gotten to where he is now and where he hopefully continues to go without that support. And that's what you take issue with. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just think it gives a little bit too much credit for the Ravens making Lamar, at least the way he says it. And maybe if we had Henry on the show, he would, clarify what he means. but it's those two sentences. It's correct that Lamar wasn't a prototypical passer that teams are accustomed to building an offense around. That is one of the reasons why he fell to number 32. It's also one of the reasons that when the Ravens did not put the exclusive franchise tag on Lamar, and that they made him available for teams to at least try to poach. And then we had, I mean, it was just crazy the day that the Ravens put that non-exclusive tag on him a couple years ago. I believe after the 2023 season after the 2022 season heading into 2023, it was like clockwork, like reporters from all over the different 32 cities saying, oh, the Falcons aren't interested. And then even their owner talked about it. This team isn't interested. This team, this team, this team. And this was after he had already won an MVP. Okay. So I do think that the Ravens and even John Harbaugh to a certain extent get credit for having a vision for what Lamar Jackson could be that the other 31 teams didn't see. I remember plain as day in 2018 when all teams were at the combine and there was a question of whether Lamar could play quarterback in this league. And I remember Ozzie Newsome had a press conference and he was short and to the point. And sometimes that is the most powerful you can be. He's like, we've got Lamar Jackson as a quarterback on our board. And then I remember John Harbaugh being interviewed. He's like, oh, yeah, we could definitely build an offense around Lamar when so many other people were questioning it. So, but it's also kind of a low standard, Bobby. And I think that's where I'm kind of getting at is it's like, do you give the Ravens a ton of credit because all the other teams were idiots? You know what I mean? They were idiots in that they couldn't see that this was a 2-time, almost 3-time MVP. And so, yes, they were John Harbaugh, Ozzie Newsome, and the Ravens saw things that the rest of the league couldn't see, but they set the bar low in terms of seeing and having a vision of what Lamar Jackson could be. And so then the next line is really what I take issue with. It took a creative and confident coach like John Harbaugh who could bring in the right coordinators to create an offense for Lamar Jackson. I mean, come on. Chris Sims just talked about how he couldn't find any negatives in his game last year. Couldn't find any negatives. And I would also suggest that while I do think the Ravens saw a vision that the rest of the league didn't see, they did, in my opinion, hold back Lamar for a couple years following 2019. So I think under Greg Roman, after that 2019 MVP season, they held Lamar back in 2020, 2021, and 2022. I have a graphic in there that says from 2019 to 2021, but that's a typo. It's up through 2022. Okay. So Greg Roman had him for 4 seasons and was fantastic in 2019, but they didn't evolve. They didn't unlock Lamar Jackson and his full capabilities because yes, they thought that they were smart enough to put together an offense that was run heavy and remain run heavy for his entire career. But you have to unlock him as a dual threat quarterback. And they did not do that from 2020 through 2022. And that's why I think they're giving the Ravens and John Harbaugh too much credit. Look at these stats side by side, Bobby, that I spent time putting together this morning. So remember, he had 2 extra seasons with Greg Roman than he has with Todd Monken. But the win percentage goes up by more than 3%, which is tough to do in a 17-game season. He goes from 72.2% wins under Greg Roman to 75.8% under Todd Monken. And by the way, the defense got worse. It was certainly worse last year. Average pass yards per season, he's up by almost 1,200 yards in passing yards per season. Now, to be fair, he was injured in 2 of those seasons under Greg Roman, so that hurts his average.
Which was 2021 and 2022. He did not finish the second half of those seasons.
Right. So that skews things for sure. However, he only dropped by 70 rush yards when he went up by 1,200 pass yards. That's crazy. Average pass yards or passing touchdowns, 24 up to 33. Stayed the same in average rushing touchdowns per year. Stayed the same. Average interceptions, he went up by only 2. But if you look at the touchdown to interception ratio, it skyrockets up. How about the quarterback rating? 98.1 to 111.3? Woo! So that creativity that Henry is saying the Ravens had, well, really, it's Todd Monken that allowed him to that unlocked him and allowed him to become who he could truly become. I've already won over the playoffs. We've done this before. How about Lamar Jackson in the playoffs? It's night and day. 1-3 versus 2-2. Passer rating, 68.3 to 105.8. Completion percentage under Greg Roman, 55.9 to 66.7 versus Monken in the playoffs. The passing yards slightly down. How about the touchdown to interception ratios? 3-5 under Greg Roman versus 7-2 and Todd Monken. So that's why I just feel like the write-up is a little much. It's a little much because I do feel like while the Ravens had more of a vision than the rest of the league, that still feels like a low bar. And I feel like it hasn't been since Todd Monken came into the picture that they've been able to unlock the full potential of Lamar. And I still don't know that he's hit a ceiling.
Well, it's tough for Greg when you evaluate his resume as OC in Baltimore. Those 2 seasons that we just mentioned, 2021 and 2022. The fact that Lamar didn't finish those years, and prior to those injuries, they were in big-time positioning, like within the AFC conference. It's tough to sit here and measure up. Now, we can all agree that clearly it was time to move on from Greg, and
Yeah.
it probably was overdue.
And
when it
I'll
happened.
admit that I was too slow on it. I feel
Okay.
like I took a year too long to recognize that fact also.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's cool. I think, as Steve Young told us, they needed somebody to come in and ramp things up a notch and sophisticate this offense and marry the pass game to the running attack and bring Lamar to new levels. And that's exactly what Todd has done. And
Mhm.
obviously, it's certainly helped that they continue to take swings both in free agency and in the draft at specific skill positions offensively, which they were not doing and certainly not successfully doing throughout Greg's time, which is not a knock on Greg, right? So that's the hard part here when you evaluate Greg. 2 key seasons after that 2019 historic year where they took the NFL by storm, 14-2, unanimous MVP, rushing records, so on and so forth. 2021 and 22, he doesn't have his quarterback for the second half stretch. And his organization is not drafting and not putting talent, giving him at his disposal consistently at the wide receiver position.
Mhm.
So those are facts that muddy the water a little bit in terms of evaluating Greg. With all of that said, it was time, and Lamar has shown what he can do in a pro-style offense over the last 2 years. Arguably back-to-back MVP seasons. Think about that.
Mhm.
Since Todd showed up. So I hear you. I do. I think Greg's time in Baltimore, I think is often mischaracterized. I
How
do.
so?
I think it's there is some within the fan base that are quick to bury him and not pay attention to, or not, they overlook what 2019 was, the significance of it. They overlook how Todd Monken has actually kept some of those running principles within the offense, within the scheme that Greg implemented. And I think they overlooked that, as I've mentioned a couple times now, 21 and 22 is super hard to measure because the way that Lamar went down with those injuries wasn't a result of being overworked by Greg and his scheme. They were flukes. They were
Yeah,
total flukes.
agree with that.
So anyway, I just think that because Lamar was an injury riddled couple years. You had the note of fire Greg Roman, right? That whole thing that blew up in front of one winning drive at the facility. I think that oftentimes his time in Baltimore can be mischaracterized, and I think he catches a few too many strays than he's deserving of receiving.
So I don't know what comments you're specifically referring to because obviously it's hard to say what an entire fan base says about a certain person, right? So let me just check in on this. So I agree with you that it's hard with those to evaluate those years with the injuries and they were not running it wasn't Greg Roman's fault, that he got injured in the pocket as a pocket passer. One of them, I think he was scrambling though, but he was in the pocket and got flushed out. So I appreciate that you give that context for Greg Roman. Would you say it's accurate that after 2019, Greg Roman did not evolve?
Greg did not evolve schematically, correct?
Would you say it's accurate that Greg Roman could not put together a passing offense that was worthy of what Lamar Jackson could do?
With the personnel that he had at his disposal, yes.
Okay. So you think it's more personnel or him as a offensive coordinator developing passing schemes?
I would lean towards, while his resume doesn't necessarily back this up, I would lean more towards a lack of personnel. When you think about the way that they had to bail themselves out throughout that era with the Des Bryants and the Deshaun Jacksons, and we could go on and on and on, the Willie Sneeds, he did not have big-time pass catchers at his disposal. And I think that deserves to be in the conversation as to why the Ravens as an organization held Lamar back during those years. Greg's scheme may have, in a sense, but the Ravens as an organization, whether it was missing through the draft, not allocating or being willing to spend, as you've calculated over the years, on the wide receiver position, that's absolutely a part of it.
So when Steve Smith went on NFL Network or other shows and called Greg Roman, like that he put together passing schemes that were worse than his son who was in elementary school, you think that was because of personnel?
No, that's a direct shot at Greg. Of course.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by, like, schematically, yes, he outgrew it, and Greg's scheme wasn't elite enough for Lamar's talents.
Because I agree with you, that context is important. I think as an offensive coordinator, which is one reason why I think I held on to Greg Roman too long. It was because I didn't feel like he even had the personnel to do much. But I look back and I'm like, okay, well, Todd Monken has Mark Andrews, Greg Roman had Mark Andrews, and Todd Monken really for the first year had Zay Flowers because Bateman didn't really get into the lineup because he was injured and really couldn't make it in too much the lineup under Todd Monken. And then so you had Zay Flowers versus Hollywood Brown. And it's like, I don't know, was the personnel that much better? I think in 2024 it was, with the emergence of a Likely and Bateman returning and his emergence. So I think that, but I think even in his first year, I don't know that the receiving core was that much better. But I think that Todd Monken did more with his personnel and allowed to do things with Lamar that he couldn't do with Greg Roman. Lamar had a lot more autonomy to make changes at the line of scrimmage. He had a lot more autonomy to have a voice. He even talked about how much more of a voice he felt like he had and how he had command of it. I just think that Todd Monken has empowered him more, and he has used those pieces around him better. And I think he's clearly a better passing coordinator than Greg Roman was. And so I appreciate that, you don't want to bury everything that Greg Roman did, especially that 2019 season. But I think along with the personnel, he himself as a passing coordinator wasn't sufficient for what Lamar did, especially to give, this much credit that Henry's given to the Ravens building an offense for Lamar Jackson. No. Todd Monken unlocked him, whereas the previous 4 years, the Ravens did not.
I think that's fair. And at the same time, to give you more specifics of what I'm referring to, because I'm seeing it in the chat, meaning when I referenced earlier on a certain percentage of the fan base burying him, it's the people that dive in and say Giro was trash. Do you guys really believe that? You think he's a trash coordinator? Or do you think you fell short in what Sarah is talking about right now when it comes to evolving and marrying the two parts of an offense together to work in a cohesive manner, passing and running, or was it, man, he, unfortunately he fell victim, as most offensive coordinators would, in key seasons coming off that 2019 campaign in 21 and 22, with Tyler Huntley and who else started? Was it like Trace McSorley and others at the end of 21 and 22 when Lamar was injured? How many coordinators would have been able to sustain that? I guess that's what I'm just trying to offer a little bit more context going back in a few years when you really evaluate Greg as a coordinator.
Yeah.
I think your counter is so fair. It's very fair to maybe think that John held on for a year too long.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that it's fair to say that it was a complicated few years for Greg as the offensive coordinator. And what Todd's done ever since is a lot of what has made Todd a super successful and coveted coordinator throughout his years, both at the collegiate level and at the NFL level. And on top of that, I also think it's fair to know or to say that Todd has had more at his disposal, but he's also brought more out of Lamar when it comes to the pro style offense that he is a master at. So,
Well, one more pushback that I'll give you is that if you look at Greg before the Ravens and after the Ravens, we're seeing the same trend. So I think he is a phenomenal run game coordinator, phenomenal. But while I wouldn't call him trash as an offensive coordinator, I certainly wouldn't hire him as my offensive coordinator. Can't do it. Run game coordinator for sure. But I don't think he's done much there at the Chargers. I see complaints coming out of the Chargers fan base, a lot of the same complaints that were heard here in Baltimore. And so, I just think that he's a very, very good, even excellent, maybe elite run game coordinator. But if you talking about him as a full package as offensive coordinator, I cannot come close to that and say that about him.
Justin and Lamar too, different players. Yes, they're both
Right.
mobile.
Which, yeah, but we both know, and I know that you're not implying this, Lamar's and Justin are not on the same level when it comes to the mobility.
I'm not implying that at all. But Justin is very gifted as a mobile runner, and yes, through 1 year hasn't exactly worked out well in Chargers land, but
right.
Good exercise. Didn't expect this much of a conversation around it, but I think it's nice to go back down memory lane when evaluating. I mean, I know he's had 3 different coordinators, right? Technically, but the 2 that he's worked with throughout the bulk of his career, Greg and now Todd, it's all part of his story, and they're knocking on the freaking door right now, and they got more at going for them right now, and more skill set pieces to work with offensively speaking, and coming off a historic season, whether it's statistically, eye test, whatever you want to say, that clearly, if they go the distance, Todd's going to be a coveted candidate, you would think, for head coaching opportunities out there.
He absolutely will. Yeah. The next step on offense is to be more clutch, and on defense, you need to return to form, return to the Ravens standard. Those are the 2 things that are needed. Coaches, got to get out of the way. Don't repeat what you did in Kansas City 2 years ago. But be more clutch on offense. Defense to return to your standard. Coaches, do not get in the way.